I was born here in Laguia as a fifth girl. It wasn't easy for my parents to have the fifth girl, and it was a tragedy. And the fact that I was a tragedy, it really put me in a challenge of trying to prove myself. The first career in my life was being a shepherd in this area. I wasn't there in the kitchen with my mother to learn how to be a good woman. I was out there and I raised myself by myself with my 50 sheep, 3 cows and a donkey. I had two options. One, to be a victim and to blame everyone for my own situation as a girl, or to do something to change my life. And I decided to do what I can do. So I started being activist since the first moment in my life. So I established the first Bedouin women organization in Israel when I was 17 years old, and it was mainly focusing on women education and women employment. When we started, the idea was that there is a law in Israel that provides kids with hot meals, and usually they would bring the food from outside of the village. And the idea was, what about if we bring this enterprise into the village, and the mothers themselves would cook for the kids, and they would, translate this skills of cooking into something that would change their own lives by having a job and a salary.
קודם לפני העבודה אני הרגשתי שאני אישה חלשה, אני לא יכולה לפרנס את הילדים שלי בגלל המצב שלי. עכשיו באמת תודה לה שאני מרגישה שאני אישה חזקה ויכולה לפרנס את המשפחה שלי.
It's community development, it's social development, and it's social policy actually, changing the whole policy around ourselves. My main achievements in my professional life is establishing AJIC, the Arab Jewish Center for Equality, Empowerment and Cooperation, which is the biggest organization dealing with community development and community organizing today in Israel. I feel like I succeeded to bring agenda of Arab Jewish organization and understanding that by bringing Arabs and Jewish together, we can build a better future. Everything that I wanted wasn't there, so I had to create it by myself. So this is what I did.
Welcome to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. One of the comments we hear frequently concerning the numerous conflicts and wars around the world is that there are no partners for peace. We're all living in our separate ideological silos, politically, culturally, economically, and religiously polarized. The doomsday clock, measuring the possibilities of a nuclear civilization ending war, is at 90 seconds before midnight. And warnings about environmental, health, and poverty catastrophes are daily reminders of how different individuals and groups perceive the dangerousness of the data, or whether they believe there's even any sort of scientific truth behind the data. Yet the human spirit is resilient, and many are devoted to Martin Luther King's uplifting, yet sobering refusal to accept the cynical notion that nation after nation must spiral down a militaristic stairway into the hell of a thermonuclear destruction. He and many others still believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. Right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant. We have a woman on the Radical Imagination today who perfectly represents that love and commitment to life. Dr. Amal Elsana Al-Jewish is the founder and executive director of Promoting Leadership for Empowerment, Development, and Justice. Her vision is to empower the most marginalized communities to address intractable social problems at the local, national, and international level. For over 30 years, she's worked at the intersection of community organizing and peace building in the Middle East and Canada, strengthening the organic connection between academia and communities. She's earned her BA in social work at Ben Gurion University in Israel, received her MA in community organizing at McGill University in Canada, as well as her PhD in social work at McGill. She's the co-founder of the Arab-Jewish Center for Equality, Empowerment, and Cooperation, has won numerous awards, including being a recipient of the Human Rights Award by the New Israel Fund, and was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005. Amal is the author of Hope is the Woman's Name, a personal memoir that recounts her experiences growing up as an indigenous Bedouin Palestinian woman in Israel, who since she was 5, spent her childhood as a shepherd, tending a herd of sheep before and after school. The book explores her incredible struggles to weave together her intersectional identity: Bedouin Arab, woman, feminist, peace activist, Palestinian, and Israeli citizen. She's truly a leader for the unarmed truth and unconditional love that Martin Luther King was talking about. And it's fitting that her name, Amal, means hope in Arabic. So thank you so very, very much. I'm just awed by your biography. I could have gone on and on, your life, your struggles, and your continuing commitment to a better world. And amidst the enormous pain and suffering that's going on, not across, obviously in Gaza and just across the world. So thank you again so very, very much for being here.
Thank you, Jim. Absolutely. This is a great opportunity for me to share with people and with everyone who can really listen to these voices, voices of love, as you mentioned, and actions of love. And for me, this is really a great opportunity. So really, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So give our audience an understanding of your background, your childhood, especially your struggle, particularly with your family, with your father and so on, and the very patriarchal society. I mean, we can go on and on the pulls and tugs that you had as a child, but give us a little idea of what we're talking about and what your book really begins talking about as well.
Yeah, sure. In fact, I was born as a fifth girl, which is something that wasn't really acceptable. My parents wanted to have a boy, and here I am, a girl, and my mother felt so upset. She felt that she's not fulfilling my father's dream of having boys. And at that moment, she was crying, and my father came to visit her at the hospital, and he said, well, I promise you not to marry with a second wife, but you promised me to give her the name. Amal means hope, hoping God will give us boys after her. So in that way, I feel like my name is not really my name. It's like, to make up for the fact that I'm a girl and there's hope to have boys after me. But 5 boys were born after me. So it's a big hope. And I think that part of my life story shaped my journey as an activist to really plant seeds of hope and try to work towards realization of that hope and building new realities that really give people, the chance of living in equality and justice. And I was born in an unrecognized village, for a Bedouin family, a Palestinian Bedouin family who lives in the south of Israel, the Naqab Negev area. And
unrecognized, we should mention unrecognized by Israel. I mean,
unrecognized by Israel. So these villages exist before the state of Israel was established.
Yeah.
and the government of Israel never recognized them. So when we say unrecognized villages, we mean that there is no infrastructure, no electricity, no water, and you might visit and you wouldn't see our villages on the map. So we call these villages the invisible villages. So these villages are not recognized by the government, and I was born in these conditions of not having water, not having electricity, and not having roads and any meanings of basic services. And I am one of 13 brothers and sisters. My mother never went to school. My father went only to the kutab, where he studied the Quran and he knew it by heart. And I'm one of a big tribe, of a Sana tribe, more than 7,000 members of that tribe. And the Bedouin community lives as the structure is a tribal structure. So each place has one tribe, but these tribes are living together and exchange and have relationships, marriage, and other ways of connecting to each other.
And there's about 300,000 or so Bedouins in Israel proper. Is that
yes,
something like that?
Yeah. Before the state of Israel, we were 100,000 Bedouins. When
Right.
Israel was established, 90% of the Bedouin population were expelled. So only 10% remain in the Naqab. And this is why most of our relatives are in Gaza and Gaza. And today, after 1948, the Bedouins are making 30% of the total population of the Naqab. We are 30%, the Jewish community is 70%. We live only in 3.2% of the land. And one of the biggest dispute between the government and the Bedouin indigenous group in Israel is the land ownership.
Am I wrong? I thought that are the Bedouins also able to join the IDF if they wanted to, or is that not? Or did they at some point?
Yeah, well, that's if people want to volunteer, they might do, they can do, but I don't think this is something that is fair, because being in the IDF meaning that you fight against your own brothers and sisters
Sure.
in West Bank and Gaza. And there are some very few Bedouins who serve in the army, but even the people who served in the army, they never get equal rights like their Jewish counterparts. So even that, serving in the army, thinking that this will grant you equal rights, never happened.
Yeah. Let's go back to your father, because he was very influenced by his mother, who gave you a tremendous amount of courage and backbone, and also, very interestingly, he worked with an Iraqi Jew who also was very important in forming his viewpoint as a man, and perhaps softened his patriarchal impulses, if you will.
Well, I think my father, when he was born, he was exposed to the power of women. My grandmother is a very strong woman, very powerful woman, very independent woman, and for me, she was the model of how women should be, and how should they act and behave in a way that we take control, we have agency. And I think my father is the son of his mother. So when he left the village to search for job, and he met with this Iraqi family that they provided him with that job, he was already a person who understand, and he experienced the power of women, and he lived that power of women. And it wasn't something he knew, but he needed someone to show him that it's possible. He needed someone to show him that in these circumstances, because remember, he was a worker in a place that will show him every single day that you doesn't belong. You are a worker here. We own the land. We are the Jewish. We are the owners. So and all of a sudden he was looking at this family that they really opened their house and their hearts to him. So he was able really to think about what is it that he wants to do in the future. And this is when he saw that girls were going to school. That was the moment that he said, yes, that's what I want to do also. I want to send my daughters to obtain and receive education.
And he did that. He did that with you, although there was a time when you wanted to continue in high school where he said, your book points out that no, enough is enough, or what happened at that point?
Well, it's for me, when I was born, it wasn't something that I I submitted to any way of treating me in a different way. And I remember my first fights were over a meal on Fridays, usually when we all sit together, the boys and the girls, and we eat. And my mother would give the nice piece of a chicken to my brother, and the girl, will get the less kind of a nice piece of a chicken. And I remember myself not accepting this reality, and I usually really would jump on my brother, take his piece of chicken, and then run away. And my sisters would look at me as crazy. Why would you fight over food? Why would you ruin our meal? And for me, it was really something. Now I'm looking back at these days, I felt it wasn't about the food. It wasn't about that nice piece of chicken. It was really about my entitlement, about my rights, about the fact that I refused to be treated differently just because I am a girl. And when my father decided that he's sending my brothers, because really he understood that the educational system in the South was so disadvantaged, that my father knew that none of my brother will really have good future if they study in the Negev Naqab area with this very disadvantaged system of school. And he decided to send them to the north, to Christian schools. And I thought that he will send me with them, because I showed him that I'm a strong girl. I was a shepherd when I was 5 years old, so I took good care of the herd and the sheep, and I was able really to show him that the power and the agency. And I thought that he will send me, but all of a sudden he said, no, girls can't go far away from their houses, and you need to stay here and finish your high school in the village, or the Bedouin village next to our village. And I remember writing to my father my first feminist document, describing women's rights, and really writing from my heart how it feels to be treated in such a way. And I wrote in the end of, like, the last sentence was that I will never give up on my rights, and I will fight for my education. And my father,
How did you respond to that?
my father.
Yeah.
So so first of all, I wrote it, and I put that letter in his track, and just to make sure that he will read it. And then when he read it, he came back. And I think the fact he came back is really made the change, because if other father would read and say, oh, she's young, she's angry, she will let go. But the fact that he came back and he said, listen, this is not because of me. This is because the structure of the patriarchal system that really prevent me from providing you with this opportunity. This is not only my decision. If I send you to study away and sleep outside of the house, I might lose the support of my tribe that I needed. And he really convinced me that wherever I go, to any school I go, I always will do great, because I rely mostly on myself and I don't need the school and the teachers. That's the way he convinced me. And I remember when he put the smile back on my face, and he looked at me and he said, and you know what, that document, that letter is very good letter, keep it. And this is why I kept that letter, because I feel it was really my first feminist document.
Your book is so incredibly nuanced and dealing with such moral complexity and layer upon layer of struggles and intersectionality. One of the things I love, the phrase you have there is that, yes, you were victims, but you acted as if you weren't victimized. And that's such an important statement. Would you like to speak a little more about that? And as you're implying here, your father was feeling such peer pressure among other men and the possible humiliation and shame that he might be experiencing, and the struggles he had to also break out of a certain way that he had been socialized. So, if you can touch on that, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, well, it's not easy to be born in a situation where wherever you look, you are a victim. As a girl in a patriarchal system, you understand that your place is not in the center, and you will be marginalized and excluded. And as a citizen of a Jewish state, being a Palestinian, you understand that the fact that you live in an unrecognized village where there is no electricity, no water, and it's only 10 kilometers away from your house, there is a Jewish family living with green parks and electricity and water. It's really very easy to sink into this victimization and say there is nothing that can be done. But the one person who really understood that victimization is not helping us in any way was my grandmother, that really taught me how to not to play the role of the victim and to channel my anger towards something positive, and not to look at life with rage and anger, but really try to look at the opportunities around yourself, and if they are not there, try to create them, because the ingredients are around yourself. You just need to find them and create that recipe that will help create hope and create the meanings of positive life. So for me, it was really wasn't a choice living with someone like my grandmother, who's, for me, we read about Bell Hooks and Tracy Hogg and all this, feminist women. For me, my grandmother was the woman who paved the way for me as a free, critical thinker, as a woman who wanted to create a change. So for me, wasn't an option to live as a victim, and I decided to, when you point out to blame everyone for your own situation, you do like this, remember there's three fingers toward yourself. What is it that I can do to change my own situation? And this is how I grew up, thinking and understanding and believing that yes, I am among the oppressed. Yes, there are circumstances, political and social, but it's up to me also to take the responsibility and educate the oppressors how to treat me, and not only liberate myself, but also liberate my oppressors. So that was one thing that was really a strong line in my journey as an activist.
Yeah, you sort of echoing Martin Luther King's message there, and the incredibly difficult role that you're in. So actually, very pragmatically, also, you took on the opportunities, limited as they might have been, and made something of it. You were now at Ben Gurion University. You were there was only two other Bedouin students at that time.
Yes.
And so you became very active in organizing there as well.
Yeah, well, I started my community organizing. I one thing I always say, being a shepherd,
Yeah.
that's something really where you acquire the best skills for community organizing. And because both people and sheep, we are followers. We have this sheep mentality. We listen to the news, we follow what's with the dominant discourse and dominant narrative. And for me, this was the essence of my skills as a shepherd. And when I was at the age of 14, I started teaching women reading and writing. My mother and the women in my tribe, not having a school or a building or a community center, or it just was my mother tent, because I really believed if you want to do something, you don't wait for a budget, you don't wait for like fancy building. You can teach under the tree. You use what exists to create the thing that it's missing. And that's something that I also teach in community organizing. You are not telling people you don't have it, so you wait. You create with what you have. And we have a lot. We have our agency, we have our skills. And when I came to the University of Ben Gurion, it was my first time, getting out of the village, connecting with the Jewish students, and it was an opportunity for me to expand my activism beyond my small village of Lagia, and to start looking at the Bedouin indigenous community, all the villages around me, and see what are the issues. And this is how I became activist, and I was leading the Arab Student Union at the university, which is something very unusual for a girl to lead. But I was there also believing that within the campus, we have to be present as Palestinian students, to bring our culture in and to bring our narrative in.
How did some of the Israeli students respond to you?
Well, there were mixed messages.
Yeah,
One, it was like a Jewish journalist who saw me with my scarf, and she came and she said, "Wow, I'm a journalist, and do you mind if I interview? Because it's unusual for a Bedouin girl to come to the university." The very orientalistic approach,
Yeah.
and
Understanding.
she interviewed me, and she asked me what I'm doing, and I told her about my 3 classes that I teach women reading and writing, that my theater group that I train Bedouin kids, and my Debka dance classes that I am doing. She said, "Wow, you do all this work. So you want to tell me you're a feminist?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Yeah, feminist women who are fighting for women's rights." And I said, "Wow, great, that's me." And this was my first time introduced to the global feminist movement and the women outside of my village. And that's the women issue, and the women's struggle is not only a women's struggle in my village, but it's a global struggle. Yes, there are different meanings in how you fight and what kind of oppression is used against you, but the women in Manhattan and the women in Lagia are both facing this exclusion only because we are women. And the other way I was treated is at the university is always, every time there is a war, every time there is something politically happened, I would be called Hamas, I would be called the terrorist, and I would be excluded from the conversations. So it wasn't easy. I had to fight both fights at the same time: the social, the patriarchal, and the political fights at the same time, and juggling the two at the same time.
And on top of that, too, you had to reach out and organize and make sure that the Arab men, understood that you weren't threatening them. You in a way, they perceived you as a threat, I'm sure, at first, but you also were telling them that you've got to get organized as well, and that you're being diminished by the system, and it's not you that was the problem. You women, although they may be distorting their own anger. And one of the other things you talk about is that the world seems to be run by a whole bunch of angry men. I tend to agree with that.
Yeah.
So you have to somehow deal with that anger as well. And they're used to, and responding to you in a negative way. And yet you're not their enemy too.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the thing, is that I was a threat to both, to the men in many ways, and also to the state, to the government, because I was holding these two, systems of domination and fighting these two battles at the same time, because the state system and the patriarchal system in many ways, they feed each other when it comes to women issues. So for example, in Israel, as a woman who's not married, you can't buy land. And when you ask them, and that was one of my campaigns, the government would say, oh, you know what, because according to what we understand from your own community and traditions, women don't own land, and this is why we are not, allowing. So this is when the system is like wanted to be sensitive to the culture on oppressing other women. And then for me, that was something like, yeah, here you are, both are trying really to work together to oppress the women more and more. And this was one of the campaigns. In a way, in my own community, I always understood, and this is what I learned also from my father and my grandmother, that the end of the day, this is my community that I love, and this is my community that I want to help, and I want to make sure that we are building a better life for the young generation to come. So if I use strategies that will create that amount of anger, and then they will kick me out of the tribe and kick me out of the village, then what did I do? Like nothing. So I always, and that's where my indigeneity came into play, because every project I started, I thought about what are the indigenous practices in my community? How did we teach children before the schools? So I built the early childhood program based on the indigenous knowledge. So people felt that this is not a Western methodology. This is how
You were
we learn.
listening to them, that you took them seriously.
Absolutely. And that's out of love and respect, because I know that if you do community work out of anger, you will hurt your people. If you do it out of mercy, you will patronize the people. But when you do it out of love and respect, that's where you create that sense of ownership. So in 10 years, when you leave, the projects are there because people feel the ownership of this process and of that project. So they don't need me anymore.
Yeah. Do you think that's a lesson that's really been learned very well among other so-called left progressive groups, both in this country, in America, and around the world?
I'm not sure.
Or support, perhaps. Do you find allies among some of the fellow progressive groups?
Yeah, I when you look at the world these days, you feel like everything is mixed up. We are all very confused. It's the pain is everywhere, the sadness is everywhere. At the same time, I do believe that people as people are good, and there is goodness, and in a way that if people get the opportunity to lead, they will be able to lead in a better way. The problem is with the power of the leaders. When they want to maintain the power, so they try to use politics of identity, so divide people. They try to use politics of fear, so they make me afraid of my colleagues, and afraid of anyone who is different from me. So these kind of politics are what the leaders doing to maintain the power, and to try to confiscate the people's power and leave them without any agency and ability to act on their behalf. And
Right.
I really, what I see is once people are organized, and we know that Margaret Mead have been saying this and said this, that don't doubt a small group of organized people. When they organize, they do something, because that's the only way things happen, right? So I do believe in the ability of people. I do believe that, uh, despite what's happening, in the end of the day, the truth and the people voice will be the voice that will be heard, and the voice that will be clear and sharp.
Totally agreed. But is it also an issue of extremists, and let's just say it what it is too, religious extremists on both sides? We have, it could be Christian, Muslim, who maintain this inclusive, or I should say exclusive mindset, and who insist on that they're doing God's will. And you run into that over and over again. And politicians, of course, I don't have to mention who's running for office today.
Yeah.
Republicans who are geniuses in that sense, and to divide and conquer and to appeal to the lesser of our angels. So when you're organizing, is there any way of reaching these people? Or how do you, not that you have much chance of even communicating, but, and as I think I said to you before the show, when we talked, I taught for over 10 years at Yeshiva University.
Mm-hmm.
I'm secular. I obviously, I taught criminology and sociology. I had interactions with the rabbis and the students. I found that you can do that at the level you're talking about. Now, there's some people that just won't listen to you, and that, I guess, pretty much you have to let them go, and work with the people you can. Is that what you do?
Well, in any idea that you become very fundamentalist about it,
Yeah.
is wrong. Any idea, doesn't matter if it's religion or nature or whatever idea that you hold in a very fundamental way, that you are not willing to critically think about it again, or analyze it again, or listen to other voices who might be different from your voice. I think that's where the problem is. It's not the religion itself is not a problem. The way people use religion, I use my Islamic values in a way that really helped me lead many projects that by the end of the day helped many people. For example, when I was talking about family planning in the Bedouin community, I used the phrase in the Quran that stated that women are the recommendation for women is to feed for 2 years, breastfeeding. And when I told the women that this is in the Quran, so you don't have to have the child every year, so take some time, take 2 years. And when I brought this in and I showed the women, and during these 2 years I brought different programs, like economic development, literacy program, when women were during these years getting all this training and not having babies, by the end of the 2 years they said, you know what, I already know what I want, so I understand that there is a job that I want to do, and I have a job already that I don't want to quit. So my point is that it's not about the religion itself, it's about these fundamentalists in all sides who use religion to maintain power, who use religion to make people afraid of not listening to them. They install fear in people by saying, I'm speaking in the name of God.
Yeah.
But God give us books that every one of us can read, and every one of us can understand these books and can act upon these books in a way that really can fix the universe, fix the planet we are living in. And I think it's not what we are facing today is not a clash of civilization. It's not a clash of religion. It's really a clash between interest and money and influence that these countries and these leaders want. And they use religion to really maintain their power.
As another mechanism to keep the right, exactly. And it's a distortion, as you say, of the religious texts. You can, Reverend Barber talks a lot about this, the distortion of fundamentalist Christianity. The prophetic, the Hebrew scriptures talk about more than anything else, love the stranger, love the other, because you are a stranger in the strange land. Now, I mean, please, I mean, the Israelis, American Jews, Jews around the world know that. They're taught that, you know, whether they're secular or not, they know that. And yet they're not acting out that those values. And it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating to see that happen. It's so hypocritical in a way. So I think your work is a vehicle through which it may be the only way to overcome this selfishness, this greed, this hunger for power, this desire to rid oneself of one's real humiliation and shame that it's such a deep level, and through unconditional love and the persistence of spreading the words and the actions that you're so heavily involved in.
Yeah, and I think there is, when we say people know, but they don't act, because yeah, when you know, it doesn't mean that you will act. You know how much we know? We know a lot. How much we act? Not much, right? So it's really clear that between the knowing and acting, there is something that should, like, there is a process that should take place. And that process called awareness. So when I teach, I absolutely focus on that part, because when you know, you ask yourself, what do I know and how do I know that? And then from there, what does that knowledge mean? How do I embody this knowledge? And what is the risk of me acting upon this knowledge? If I am talking about justice, if I'm talking about liberation, if I'm talking about human rights, I have myself to embody these values, to be able to really bring them out and really implement them in other places. But in this world, we see a lot of talking. We talk justice, but we're not sure we're talking about the same face of justice. We talk peace. I'm not sure of the privileged talk peace when the oppressed talk liberation. And is the peace and liberation are the same, you know, two faces of the same coin? So it's really very important that when we talk about this terminology, to understand that we mean what we mean. Justice mean that no one is held, under any kind of oppression only because of their color or nationality or religion or gender, that all people share the same rights. And there are many people, Jim, many people around us, when they are behind the microphone, they will say all people share the same rights, yet they will look at Gaza and not say that these children deserve life. And they would look at different place and look at white kids and say these kids are entitled to life. So we start dehumanize and paralyze and look at human being as different creatures, as something like we are not equal. Where in the Quran and in the Tanakh, and I'm sure in the Christianity, we all created, by God from the same children, all human beings. And I feel what we are lacking these days is that humanity. We look at these different identities that in many ways, because we are not able to look at the identity as a way that brings us together. So we look at identities as ways that divides us. So instead of looking at what is it that brings us together, so we look at the nationality, religion, all these identities that divide us were the essence of my Palestinian identity, the essence of my Muslim identity, the essence of my feminist women identity, gender identity is being human. For me, that's my drive. That's the value that I stand for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And let me just add a couple of things our colleague Cornel West would say as well. It's about not only awareness, but it's the courage to act. And as he puts it, straighten your backbone. And that's what people need to do and not be fearful because, the system is falling apart all around us and the emperor has no clothes and we're mystified. And granted, many of us, of course, are scared and economically we're put in positions of great fear. So that's another dimension that we have to talk about economic. But what I wanted to ask also is what you're now interested in doing. What you're in Montreal now, and you have been for several years. You have a couple of wonderful children. How are you interacting with what's going on in the Gaza war, for example, and how does your work now beginning to entail a more international flavor and organizing? So if you'd like to speak on that, on those two issues, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, it's really very hard, to speak about what is it that we are doing these days when you see the black smoke and the red blood and the noise of the Apache. It's so hard, and I lost people, people I know, people I care about, and for me, it's really very, very difficult moments to try to re eh, re-envision what is it that we want to see in the near future. And it has been always for me something that relates to the most marginalized groups, because when you look around the world, the most marginalized, whether indigenous women, disabled, ethnic minorities, um, you know name it, economic minorities, all these people usually are the one who pay the price for whatever crisis is. Whether, even if you look at the corona and you really look closer, you
Yeah.
see that the most marginalized are the one who paid the huge price of the corona. So my focus is to always work with the most marginalized, to bring them into the forefront and say, we don't want to be only the victims of these crises and conflicts and war, because this is, in the end of the day, is our life, and we want to be the one who can shape this life. So most of the programs, whether it's my programs with Jordanians, with Moroccans, with indigenous groups here in Montreal, with refugees, is all focused on the empowerment of the most marginalized to take the lead. And I absolutely agree with you. When fear is there, it's very hard for people to lead, because what is the price that I will pay if I step out of the door, if I leave my comfort zone? But there is nothing that can happen if you are jailed in that fear. And I do understand that fear is really very tough feeling. But one lesson I learned from my grandmother: fear and freedom can't and cannot exist in one place. You have to choose one over the other. And if you choose freedom, when I say freedom, doesn't mean physical freedom only. It's the freedom to be able to think critically and question and ask questions, and that common sense to say why it's common sense and who decided that this is common sense.
Yeah.
When you are able to think freely, that's freedom. When you are able to criticize and think, what is it for these people and what is it for this group of people, then you are free. And once you are in that state of mind, you will have the courage and you will be brave to step out, because you feel how freedom can really energize you.
You know, you, you wrote about this when you were in second grade, and I'm sure your dissertation incorporated this at a quote unquote more academic, sophisticated level. So in a way, it is very, very simple. And gosh, we only have a couple more minutes to go here. It's gone so fast. Are you buoyed by some of the protests and efforts in the Israeli peace movement? Which is, and also, are there burgeoning movements within the Arab world?
Yeah.
That,
Well, I, I lived in Israel my entire life. I worked on human rights issues in Israel. I worked in peace camps in Israel, and I look at what's happening, and I can say to you that I absolutely feel sorry for the people there. The people are led by this very extremist government. There are many people who absolutely understand that liberation of the oppressed is something that will guarantee them peace and security, and that when Palestinians are having their self-determination, that their life as Israeli, as Jewish, will be much better. Many people do have, but these people are living in that fear that I just mentioned, that fear of the other, that if you do this, the Arabs will do that to you. If you do that, the Arabs will kill you. If you do, and
yeah,
that's the name of that's the narrative in Israel. And I feel that people, the majority of the Israeli people are jailed in this narrative. And it's really up to us and up to many others around the world who really need to help liberate the people who believe in justice and human rights, people, and even people who don't believe and think they don't believe and think that we should kill and to survive. These people are also are victims of their understanding,
their own hatred.
yeah, of their own hatred. And in the Arab world, I the sad thing that these monarchies, these dictatorships, are not allowing for these amazing voices, for this human agency to flourish. When I look at the social media and I see the voice, I hear the voices from the Arab world, I want to fly. These are amazing voices, but after 2 minutes you understand that these voices are suppressed, these voices are not wanted, only people, because people wanted to think out of the box, because people wanted to live a different life. So what I wish for is that all people, whether it's in the Arab world or was it the Jewish people in Israel and around the world, is really to be able to free ourselves from this dictator and this power and these rulers who are trying to keep us down and make us afraid of our own voices. And that's what's happening when people are afraid, when they see this barbaric things happening around the world and in Gaza and they are not acting, tells
Right.
you how afraid people are, or how in a way they were convinced by their leaders that the people 40 kilometers away from you are not human. They are not human, so you don't care about them. And that's exactly what's happening.
Well, listen, we're over time. Well put. Couldn't put it any better. Listen, we've got to fly, and it's hope is a woman's name, and all we need to do is listen to you and your message. And you cannot not be buoyed up, and you're magnificent. And just carry on. And love you very much. And we'll do all we can here as well. And hope to see you in person.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you
Thank
for this great opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And thank you so very much also for listening to us this week on The Radical Imagination. This is Jim Vrettos. We'll see you again next week on The Radical Imagination.